Why is everyone looking at me like that? I didn't know it was you.
That is exactly why it mattered.
You are dismissed. Just leave. Get rid of it. Stop showing this. It looked important.
You only respected people who could improve your position.
No! Ethan, tell him you know me.
Vanessa, I can't.
I watched you hurt people when you thought they didn't matter.
Maybe you can change, but not as my wife.
The engagement will not proceed today.
The sentence that ended Vanessa Hale's dream of marrying into the Brooks family was spoken before she ever met the man she thought she needed to impress. It was a hot afternoon in Beverly Hills, the kind of afternoon when the white stone driveway of the Brooks estate seemed to shine under the sun. Beyond the gates, the mansion rose across 12 acres of gardens, fountains, old olive trees, and glass walls that caught the light like something built for magazines. A team of staff had been preparing all morning because Ethan Brooks, the only son of billionaire Richard Brooks, was bringing home the woman he intended to marry. Near the front garden, an older man in faded work clothes knelt beside a row of white roses. His gloves were dirty. Sweat had darkened the back of his shirt. A straw hat shaded his face as he clipped dead blooms and gathered them carefully into a basket. His name, according to the estate staff that week, was Daniel. At 3 o'clock, a silver supercar rolled through the gates. Ethan stepped out first, tall, handsome, and nervous in the way sons become nervous when they bring love home to wealth. Then Vanessa stepped out beside him. She was beautiful. No one could deny that. Her dress was cream silk, her sunglasses were designer, and every movement carried the careful confidence of a woman who knew how she looked from every angle. She glanced at the mansion first, then the fountain, then the garden. For one brief second, delight crossed her face. This was the life she had imagined. This was the entrance. This was the photograph. Then she noticed the gardener. The old man was still kneeling by the roses, one hand braced against the grass as he pushed himself slowly to his feet. Vanessa's expression changed immediately. She leaned toward Ethan and said loud enough for the gardener to hear, "Can you ask him to move? I don't want a messy old worker in the background of our first photo here." Ethan's smile faltered. The gardener lowered his eyes and stepped back with his basket, as if he had heard nothing. But he had heard every word. Vanessa took out her phone, adjusted her hair, and posed in front of the mansion, never once realizing that the man she had just dismissed was not a worker hired to trim the roses. He was Richard Brooks himself, founder of Brooks Corporation, owner of the estate, and the one man whose blessing could decide whether Vanessa ever became part of the family. Richard had not dressed as a gardener because he enjoyed tricks. He had done it because he was trying to answer one question no background check dinner conversation or society photograph could answer. Did Vanessa love his son? Or did she love the life attached to his name? Richard Brooks had spent most of his life being underestimated before he became impossible to ignore. He was not born into marble halls or private drivers. He grew up in a narrow house near a rail yard in Cleveland, where his mother cleaned offices at night and his father repaired industrial machines until arthritis bent his fingers. Richard learned early that poverty was not only the absence of money, it was the way certain people looked through you as if your exhaustion proved you had less soul. He built Brooks Corporation from a small logistics company that owned 3 trucks and 1 warehouse with a leaking roof. He slept on office floors, drove deliveries himself, fixed accounts by hand, and lost money more times than his later admirers liked to mention. He became rich slowly, then suddenly, and by the time magazines started calling him a visionary, he had already learned the one lesson money could never improve. Character was easiest to fake around equals and superiors. It revealed itself around people one believed did not matter. His late wife Marianne had understood that better than anyone. She had married Richard when his business was still fragile and his suits came from discount racks. She had watched him become powerful without letting power become his personality. When their son Ethan was born, Marianne used to hold the baby near the kitchen window and whisper, "Let him be loved for who he is, not for the doors his name can open." After Marianne died, that sentence stayed with Richard like a prayer and a warning. Ethan grew into a decent man, but not a hard-tested one. He had charm, generosity, and a good heart that sometimes mistook comfort for wisdom. Because he had grown up protected, he often believed people were better than they were willing to prove. He wanted love to be simple. Richard knew love was rarely simple when money stood close enough to cast a shadow. So, when Ethan announced that he planned to propose to Vanessa Hale after less than a year of dating, Richard did not shout. He did not insult her. He did not threaten to cut Ethan off. He simply asked for 1 week. 1 week for what Ethan asked. 1 week to see her when she is not performing for me. Ethan frowned. Dad, Vanessa is not some fortune hunter. I hope you are right. She loves me. Then kindness will not frighten her. That was all Richard said. He shaved his familiar beard into a rough gray stubble, darkened a few age spots with makeup, wore loose gardener's clothes, and asked the estate manager to introduce him to temporary staff as Daniel. Only Ethan knew the truth. Even then, Richard made his son promise not to interfere unless someone was in danger. Ethan agreed, though uneasily. He thought the test was unnecessary. He thought his father was being old-fashioned. Most of all, he thought Vanessa would pass without effort. The first afternoon proved less simple. After the photo by the fountain, Vanessa walked through the estate as if she were already its mistress. She admired the pool terrace, the guest house, the glass dining room, and the long lawn where the engagement party would be held in 2 days. She asked how many staff lived on the property. She asked whether the east wing could be redesigned. She asked if the family logo on the gates could be made more visible for photographs. When she passed Daniel again near the rose garden, she snapped her fingers. The old man looked up. "Those petals are all over the path," she said. "Can you clean them before my shoes get stained?" There were 3 petals on the stone. Daniel nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Ethan gave a soft laugh, trying to make the moment lighter. Vanessa likes everything perfect. Richard looked at his son for half a second. Ethan looked away. That was the first wound of the week. Not Vanessa's command. Richard had heard worse from better-dressed people. The wound was watching Ethan explain cruelty as taste. The next morning, Vanessa arrived early for a planning meeting with the event designer. She wore tennis white and carried a notebook filled with seating arrangements, floral themes, and names of photographers she wanted to impress. Daniel was watering a bed of lavender near the terrace when she came outside on a video call. "Yes, this is the family estate," she said, angling her phone so the garden appeared behind her. "No, Richard is very private, but after the engagement, that will change." Daniel kept the hose low so it would not disturb the call. Vanessa turned suddenly. "Stop that!" He released the trigger. "The sound," she said. "I'm recording." "I'm sorry," she sighed into the phone. "The staff here are sweet, but you really have to manage them closely." Daniel lowered his head and moved away. Inside, the housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, watched from the kitchen window with her lips pressed tightly together. She had worked for Richard for 15 years and knew exactly who Daniel was. She also knew Richard had forbidden anyone to defend him too quickly. It nearly broke her patience. Vanessa spent that day revealing herself in small, precise ways. She thanked the event designer warmly because the woman had status. She praised the chef when Ethan was watching, then told him privately that family staff should not hover near guests. She asked a driver to move a car 3 times because she wanted a cleaner view of the fountain. She left a half-finished coffee on a marble ledge and told a maid, "Be careful with that, it's imported porcelain," as if the cup were more delicate than the person holding it. To Ethan, she was excited. To the staff, she was a weather system. Richard noticed all of it. Still, he waited. A person can have a bad hour. A nervous fiancée can become too controlling before meeting her future father-in-law. Wealthy families can intimidate people into strange behavior. Richard did not want to judge too quickly because he knew judgment could become its own arrogance. He wanted to see whether Vanessa had humility beneath the polish. On the 3rd day, she gave him the answer more clearly. The garden crew had been moving large ceramic planters for the engagement party. Daniel took one side of a heavy pot, while another gardener held the other. Halfway across the terrace, his foot slipped on a wet patch near the fountain. He dropped to one knee, catching himself with one hand. The planter cracked against the stone. Mrs. Alvarez gasped from the doorway. Ethan, who had been on the phone near the pool, turned immediately. Vanessa was closest. For a moment, Daniel stayed still, pain moving through his lower back. He was 72. Pride did not make bones younger. Vanessa looked at the cracked planter first. "Are you serious?" she said. Daniel pushed himself up slowly. "I apologize. That planter was supposed to be in the photographs." Ethan walked over, concern finally breaking through his discomfort. "Daniel, are you okay?" Vanessa touched Ethan's arm. "He's fine. If he couldn't lift it, he should have said so." The other gardener stared at her. Daniel wiped dirt from his palm. "It was my mistake." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Mistakes are expensive on a property like this. If people can't do the work, they should retire. There are hundreds of others who would be grateful for the job." That sentence settled over the terrace. Ethan looked at her. Vanessa, what she said genuinely annoyed. "I'm just being practical." Practical. Richard had heard that word used to cover so much ugliness. People called it practical when they underpaid workers, practical when they ignored pain, practical when they protected image over conscience. He bent to pick up the broken pieces of the planter. Ethan stepped forward to help, then stopped when Richard gave him the smallest shake of the head. The test was not only for Vanessa anymore. Richard needed to know what his son would excuse in the name of love. That evening, Ethan came to Richard's private study through the back staircase. The room smelled of leather, old books, and the cedar box where Marianne's letters were kept. Richard had washed off the dirt but still wore the gardener's shirt. "God, this is getting uncomfortable," Ethan said. Richard poured tea into 2 cups. "Good, that's your answer. Comfort has not taught you enough." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "She was nervous. She wants the engagement to be perfect." Richard looked at him. A cracked planter upset her more than an injured man. "She didn't know it was you. That is the point." Ethan sank into the chair opposite him. "You're looking for reasons not to like her." "No," Richard said. "I am looking for reasons to trust her." Ethan's face tightened. "You don't understand her. She grew up with nothing stable. Her mother married and divorced men who treated money like oxygen. Vanessa fought her way into every room she's in. She cares about image because people judged her before she had anything." Richard softened slightly. That was the first honest thing Ethan had said about her. "Pain may explain a person," Richard said. "It does not excuse who they choose to hurt." Ethan looked away. Richard did not press further. A lesson forced too early becomes an argument. He had learned that with business, with grief, and with sons. The next day, Alicia Brooks arrived. Alicia was Ethan's cousin, the daughter of Richard's younger sister. She worked as a pediatric surgeon in San Diego and had inherited none of the family's hunger for public attention. She came to the estate in simple linen pants, carrying a tote bag full of children's books she was donating through the Brooks Foundation. Vanessa greeted her politely at first, then cooled when she realized Alicia had no interest in discussing bridal photographers, luxury publications, or which celebrity guests might attend. Alicia noticed Daniel within 10 minutes. He was sitting on a low stone bench near the greenhouse, one hand pressed against his back. The fall from the day before had left him stiff, and the afternoon heat was punishing. Alicia walked into the kitchen, filled a glass with cold water, found a small packet of pain relief from her bag, and brought both outside. "Excuse me," she said gently. "You look like you could use this." Daniel glanced up. "Thank you, miss. I am only resting a minute." "Then rest with water." She handed him the glass. "My father used to pretend pain was a personal failure. It was very annoying." Richard smiled despite himself. "Your father sounds stubborn, professionally." Alicia sat on the bench beside him without concern for the dust. "I don't know who designed this garden, but it's beautiful." "It was designed by Mrs. Brooks," Daniel said before he could stop himself. Alicia's expression softened. "Marianne," he nodded. "I was young when she died, but I remember she liked white roses." "Very much." Alicia looked across the beds. "Then you've taken good care of something important." Richard had to look down at the glass of water. No one had told Alicia to say that. No one was watching her for approval. She did not know she was sitting beside the owner of the estate, speaking to the man who had paid for part of her medical school after her father died. She saw only an older worker in pain, and she chose tenderness. From the terrace, Vanessa watched them with a frown. Later, she pulled Ethan aside. "Your cousin is sweet, but she's a little strange." Strange how she was sitting with the gardener like they were old friends. Ethan's jaw tightened. Maybe she was being kind. Vanessa laughed lightly. "Of course, but there's a difference between being kind and confusing boundaries. Staff need boundaries. If you blur them, they start acting familiar." Ethan did not answer. For the first time, Richard saw doubt pass across his son's face and stay there. The engagement party was now 2 days away. More staff arrived. Florists filled the service courtyard with buckets of orchids and roses. Caterers measured the lawn. Security checked guest lists. Vanessa moved through it all like a director adjusting ribbons, criticizing napkin shades and correcting anyone who addressed her too casually. At lunch, she sat with Ethan under the pergola while Daniel trimmed the hedge nearby. Vanessa seemed not to notice him. "I was thinking," she said, "after we're engaged, we should discuss the foundation board." Ethan looked up. "The foundation?" "Yes. It would look strange if your fiancé had no visible role. I could help with events, donor dinners, maybe international campaigns. The foundation is Alicia's world more than mine." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Alicia is lovely, but she doesn't understand visibility. Charity matters more when people see it." Ethan set down his fork. "Does it?" "Don't be naive, Ethan. Influence is about presentation. Your family has been too private. With the right strategy, the Brooks name could become iconic. It is my father's name. My mother's too, and soon mine." Daniel clipped one branch too sharply. A leaf fell at his feet. Vanessa glanced toward him. "Could you do that somewhere else? We're having a private conversation." Daniel stepped back. "Yes, ma'am." Ethan watched him go. This time he did not defend her. That afternoon, Richard created the smallest test of the week. He placed an old leather wallet on the bench inside the greenhouse, partly hidden beneath a folded cloth. It was not valuable in any obvious way. The leather was cracked. Inside were $11, a bus pass from years ago, and a faded photograph of Richard, Marianne, and Ethan when Ethan was 7 years old, standing in the garden before the mansion had been renovated. The wallet had belonged to Richard's father. He did not leave it there because he believed Vanessa would steal. He wanted to know whether she recognized value when money was not the value. Vanessa entered the greenhouse just before 4, looking for a quiet corner to take photographs of her engagement ring options. Ethan had not proposed yet, but she had already selected 3 designs and sent them to a jeweler. She noticed the wallet on the bench, opened it with 2 fingers, and made a face. "Daniel," she called. though she did not know whether he was nearby. Richard was behind a row of citrus trees, pruning slowly. Vanessa flipped through the wallet, saw the few bills, and laughed under her breath. Then she saw the photograph. She stared at it only long enough to decide it was old and unimportant. "Honestly," she muttered, "why do people leave trash everywhere?" She dropped the wallet into a black waste bin near the greenhouse door. Richard closed his eyes. There are disappointments that arrive like storms, loud and violent. Others arrive softly and somehow hurt more. The wallet hitting the bottom of the bin was soft. The meaning was not. 10 minutes later, Alicia came through the greenhouse carrying a tray of small flowers for the children's table. She noticed the wallet in the bin because the photograph had slipped halfway out. She picked it up, wiped a smear of soil from the leather, and opened it. Her face changed when she saw the photograph. She did not know it was Richard's father's wallet. She did not know it was part of a test. She simply understood that a picture of a family is not trash because the leather around it is old. Alicia stepped outside and began searching the garden. "Daniel," she called. Richard came from behind the hedge. "I think this might be yours," she said, holding it with both hands. "I found it in the bin. There isn't much money, but the photograph looked important." For several seconds, Richard could not speak. Alicia misunderstood his silence. "I'm sorry if I opened it. I only wanted to find the owner." He took the wallet carefully. "You did right. She shouldn't have thrown it away," Alicia said. Richard looked at her. Alicia's cheeks colored slightly. She had revealed that she knew who had done it. Still, she continued, "People think sentimental things are small because they can't price them." Richard's throat tightened. "What is your name, Miss Alicia?" "I will remember that," she smiled. "Please remember to drink water, too." After she left, Richard stood alone in the garden with the wallet in his hand. On the photograph, Marianne was laughing. Ethan was missing one front tooth, and Richard still looked like a man who could not believe the house behind him belonged to his family. He knew then that he had his answer. But the most painful part was not Vanessa. It was Ethan. That evening, Richard asked his son to meet him in Marianne's rose garden. The sun had lowered behind the hills, and the white roses held the last gold of the day. Richard handed Ethan the wallet. Ethan opened it and went still when he saw the photograph. Granddad's wallet. Vanessa threw it away. Ethan's face drained. "Are you sure?" Alicia returned it. Ethan looked toward the house where Vanessa was laughing with the event planner over champagne. Maybe she didn't know. Richard nodded slowly. Yes. She did not know its history. She did not know its value. She did not know who was watching. That is why it matters. Ethan sat on the stone wall beside the roses. For the first time all week, he looked younger than his age. "I wanted you to be wrong," he said. "So did I." "She's not always like this." Richard sat beside him. "No one is always anything. She can be warm. She remembers things I say. She knows when I'm anxious before meetings. She made me feel chosen." Richard heard the grief inside the defense. "I am not asking whether she can be charming to the man she wants to marry. I am asking whether she can be kind when kindness gives her nothing." Ethan looked at the wallet in his hands. Richard continued, softer now. "Your mother once told me that love is not proven by how someone looks at you across a candlelit table. It is proven by how they treat the waiter when the order is wrong, the cleaner when the floor is wet, the gardener when no one has introduced him, the old man whose wallet contains only $11 and a photograph." Ethan's eyes shone. "I hate this." "I know. What do I do?" Richard stood slowly. "Tomorrow, you will see the truth in full. After that, you will decide whether you want to build a life with it." The day of the engagement party arrived, bright, windless, and mercilessly beautiful. By late afternoon, more than 300 guests had gathered across the Brooks estate. There were executives, actors, philanthropists, politicians, old family friends, and people Vanessa had invited because their presence would make the photographs more valuable. A string quartet played near the fountain. Waiters carried trays of champagne. White roses lined the walkway to a temporary stage facing the lawn. Vanessa looked radiant. She wore a pale gold gown and moved among the guests as if she had already been crowned. She introduced herself confidently, laughed at the right moments, touched Ethan's arm whenever a camera turned toward them, and spoke of our family's next chapter before anyone had made it official. Ethan was quiet. Vanessa thought he was emotional. Richard knew he was breaking. Daniel was visible near the edge of the lawn, carrying a coil of hose beside the flower beds. Vanessa saw him and immediately stiffened. She pulled Ethan aside. "Why is that gardener still here?" Ethan looked at her. "He works here. Today. During this event, it's a garden event, Vanessa." "Don't be clever." Her voice lowered. "There are photographers here, investors, people from the foundation. I do not want staff wandering through the background like this is some public park." "He is a person, not a background." For the first time, Ethan said it without softening the edge. Vanessa blinked, surprised. "What is wrong with you today?" Maybe I'm finally asking the right question. Before she could respond, the music faded. The estate attorney, Margaret Bell, stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. The guests turned toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "thank you for joining the Brooks family today. Before the engagement announcement proceeds, Mr. Richard Brooks has asked to address you." Vanessa smiled instantly and turned toward the mansion entrance, expecting Richard Brooks to appear in a suit. No one came from the mansion. Instead, Daniel walked from the side of the lawn toward the stage. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Vanessa's smile collapsed. "What is he doing?" Daniel climbed the steps slowly. He removed his straw hat and placed it on the lectern. Then he unbuttoned the faded work shirt. Beneath it was a crisp white dress shirt and a dark vest. Margaret Bell stepped forward and handed him a navy suit jacket. The lawn went silent. Alicia, standing near the front, covered her mouth. Mrs. Alvarez began to cry. The old gardener turned toward the crowd, and when he spoke, his voice carried the calm authority of a man who had built everything around them. "For those I have not met in these clothes," he said, "my name is Richard Brooks." The silence broke into gasps. Vanessa stepped backward as if the ground had moved. Richard looked over the guests, then at his son, then at Vanessa. "I apologize for the unusual introduction," he said, "but before this family welcomed someone new, I needed to understand what kind of heart was asking to enter it." A large screen behind the stage lit up. Richard had not planned to humiliate for entertainment. He had planned to reveal enough truth that no lie could survive the evening. The footage came from estate security cameras from the terrace, the greenhouse, the garden path. Vanessa asking that the old worker be moved out of her photograph. Vanessa telling Daniel to clean petals before they stained her shoes. Vanessa dismissing his fall beside the planter. Vanessa saying staff needed boundaries. Vanessa dropping the old wallet into the trash. The guests watched in stunned silence. Then the footage changed. Alicia bringing water and medicine. Alicia returning the wallet. Mrs. Alvarez helping a server whose tray had broken. A young security guard quietly covering a staff member's post so he could call home. Small moments unseen by most, now filling the screen with a different kind of wealth. Richard let the final image rest on Alicia handing the wallet back to Daniel. Then he turned to Vanessa. "You did not fail because you were poor once," he said. "You did not fail because you wanted a beautiful life. Wanting beauty is not a sin. Wanting security is not a sin. You failed because you only respected people who could improve your position." Vanessa's face twisted with panic. "Richard, please, I didn't know it was you." "That is the only honest defense you have given," Richard said. "You did not know it was me." Her eyes filled. "I was stressed. I was trying to make everything perfect." "No," Richard replied. "You were trying to make everything look perfect. There is a difference." Ethan stood frozen beside her. Vanessa turned to him. "Ethan, tell him you know me." Ethan looked at the woman he had planned to marry. He saw the gown, the beauty, the fear, the ambition. He also saw Daniel on one knee beside the broken planter. He saw the wallet in the trash. He heard his mother's old lesson through his father's voice. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and took out the engagement ring box. Vanessa whispered, "No." Ethan opened the box, looked at the ring, then closed it again. "I loved who I thought you were," he said, "and maybe part of that person was real. But I watched you hurt people when you thought they didn't matter, and I kept making excuses because I wanted my dream more than I wanted the truth." Vanessa began to cry. This time not delicately, not beautifully, her face crumpled under the weight of being seen. "I can change," she said. Ethan's voice broke. "Maybe you can, but not as my wife. Not because the fortune disappeared from the end of the aisle." The lawn remained painfully quiet. Richard turned back to the guests. "The engagement will not proceed today." No one applauded. It was not that kind of moment. A broken illusion does not need applause. It needs silence long enough for people to recognize the cost. Vanessa left through the side path with her mother and 2 friends. Some guests watched her go with pity, others with judgment. Richard watched with sadness. He did not hate her. Hate would have been easier. He saw in Vanessa a person who had mistaken status for safety so completely that she had begun to treat kindness as weakness. That was not rare. It was only rarely exposed in front of 300 people. After the crowd thinned, Ethan found his father in the rose garden. The stage was being dismantled. Staff moved quietly across the lawn. The flowers Vanessa had chosen for photographs now looked softer in the evening light, less like decoration and more like living things. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. Richard was sitting on the stone bench, his gardener's gloves beside him. "For loving someone, for not seeing it sooner." Richard looked at his son. "Love can make fools of better men than us. I let her speak to you that way. You let her speak to Daniel that way. That is the part I need you to remember." Ethan lowered his head. Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "A wife is not a trophy you win in front of others. She is the person who will stand beside you when the room is empty, when the money is threatened, when illness comes, when grief changes your face. Choose someone who can still see people clearly when there is nothing to gain." Ethan's eyes filled. "Did Mom know that about you?" Richard smiled faintly. "Your mother knew everything worth knowing about me before I could afford to hide it." For several minutes they sat together without speaking. The next morning, Richard gathered the estate staff in the garden. He thanked them publicly, not as props in a family lesson, but as people whose patience had carried a painful week. He apologized for asking them to endure Vanessa's treatment longer than felt fair. He gave bonuses to every staff member who had worked the event, but more importantly, he listened as Mrs. Alvarez explained how often wealthy guests treated workers as scenery. The Brooks estate changed after that. Not dramatically, not for publicity, quietly. Guest rules were rewritten. Staff were empowered to report mistreatment. No event could be planned without consulting the people expected to carry it. Richard knew money could not erase every indignity, but it could stop paying for new ones. As for Vanessa, the story followed her farther than she wanted. Some people mocked her online. Others defended her. For a while, she tried to claim the footage was edited, then stopped when no one close to the family supported the lie. Months later, Richard heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had begun volunteering at a community garden in Pasadena. He did not know whether it was sincere or reputational repair. He hoped, for her sake, that it became sincere eventually. Ethan did not date for a long time. He returned to work at Brooks Corporation with a seriousness Richard had not seen before. He spent time with department heads he used to pass in hallways. He learned the names of receptionists, driver's assistants, cleaners, groundskeepers, and warehouse supervisors. At first, people assumed it was guilt. Maybe part of it was, but guilt, if used honestly, can become education. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Ethan attended a Brooks Foundation event at a children's hospital in Los Angeles. He was there to speak with donors, but he found himself distracted by a woman in a simple blue dress kneeling near the entrance. Her name was Maya Reynolds, a program coordinator for the foundation. A janitor's cart had tipped slightly, scattering paper towels and cleaning cloths across the floor. Guests were stepping around the mess, careful not to get involved. Maya crouched beside the older custodian and helped gather everything one piece at a time. The custodian kept apologizing. Maya shook her head. "Please don't apologize. This hallway was busy and people forget to see what's right in front of them." Ethan stopped walking. It was not love at first sight. Ethan no longer trusted feelings that arrived dressed as certainty. It was something better. Recognition. A quiet answer to a lesson that had taken him too long to learn. Later, when he introduced himself, he did not mention the Brooks name first. He asked about the program. He listened. He noticed how Maya spoke to donors and janitors with the same steady warmth. He noticed she did not become sweeter when important people walked by. She was already sweet before they arrived. That evening, Ethan visited his father. "I met someone today," he said. Richard looked up from his desk. "Should I find my gardener clothes?" Ethan laughed, embarrassed. "No, I think I finally understand what I'm supposed to look for." Richard leaned back, smiling, with the kind of relief fathers rarely show fully. Then, maybe the lesson was not wasted. Years later, people still told the story of the engagement that ended before the ring was given. Some told it as gossip about a woman who insulted the wrong gardener. Some told it as a warning about marrying for money. But inside the Brooks family, the story became something quieter and more useful. It was the story of a father who loved his son enough to risk being hated for telling the truth. It was the story of a son who learned that beauty without humility can become danger. It was the story of a woman who lost a future not because she lacked elegance, but because she lacked compassion when it mattered most. And it was the story of a wallet in a greenhouse worth only $11 to a stranger, but priceless to the man who carried the memory inside it. The truth is, most people reveal themselves long before they are tested by crisis. They reveal themselves in restaurants, driveways, gardens, elevators, service entrances, hospital hallways, and small moments nobody thinks will matter. They reveal themselves by the way they speak to the person carrying their luggage, cleaning their table, trimming their roses, opening their gate, fixing their car, or standing quietly in the background of their perfect photograph. Vanessa thought the gardener ruined the picture. In reality, the gardener revealed what the picture could never show. So be careful whom you choose to love. Do not choose only the person who looks good beside you in public. Choose the person who remains kind in private. Choose the person who can speak with respect to the waiter, the driver, the housekeeper, the gardener, and the old man with dirt on his gloves. Choose the person who understands that dignity does not begin at a certain income level, and kindness is not something to reserve for people who can offer something back. Because money can build a mansion. It can fill a garden with roses. It can buy music, champagne, diamonds, and 300 guests in beautiful clothes. But money cannot create character where there is none. And one careless sentence spoken to someone you think is beneath you can reveal the truth that changes everything. If you believe kindness matters more than money and status, leave a comment and share this story. It may reach someone before they make the mistake of judging another human being by their clothes, their job, or the dirt on their hands.
That cannot be him.
For 1 week, I let you decide what I was worth. I came prepared to give this school $50 million.
Equity is not a banner. It is a practice.
I was only being practical. A student is not a financial category. We can review this internally.
You will review it, but not with my money.
The grant is withdrawn tonight. The grant is withdrawn tonight! He's actually doing it!
What will we do now?
The grant is withdrawn tonight. Say yes only if the work matters more than the title.
Then yes.
They judged me before I reached the front door.
The first thing Isaac Freeman noticed when he reached the gates of St. Anselm Preparatory Academy was not the size of the building, it was the parking lot. A line of luxury cars curved beneath the old stone archway like a parade of polished status. Black sedans, silver sports cars, imported SUVs, drivers holding doors open, parents stepping out in tailored suits and designer coats. The school had placed student ambassadors near the entrance to greet families by name, and the children had already learned which parents deserved the brightest smiles. Then Isaac arrived on an old bicycle. He was a black man in his early 60s wearing a faded brown coat, worn shoes, and a cap pulled low against the Chicago wind. The bicycle chain clicked as he pushed it toward the visitor rack. A few parents glanced at him, then looked away. One mother pulled her daughter slightly closer, not out of fear exactly, but out of that quiet reflex people develop when they think someone does not belong. Isaac locked the bicycle, straightened the folder under his arm, and walked toward the front office. He had come for parent-teacher conferences on behalf of his niece, Zoe Freeman, an 8th grade student with sharp eyes, a quiet voice, and the kind of intelligence that made lazy adults uncomfortable. Zoe had been at St. Anselm for 6 months on a merit placement arranged privately through her family. She did not brag. She did not arrive in luxury cars. She wore clean uniforms, carried second-hand books, and kept her head down when classmates discussed vacations that cost more than some families earned in a year. To most of the school, Zoe was a scholarship girl. To Isaac, she was the child he had promised his late sister he would protect. At the front desk, a receptionist looked at his coat before she looked at his face. "I'm here for the 8th grade parent conference," Isaac said, "for Zoe Freeman." The receptionist's smile did not appear. "Tuition accounts are handled in the finance office." Isaac blinked once, then smiled gently. "I'm not here about tuition." A teacher standing near the doorway glanced over. She was Evelyn Pierce, Zoe's homeroom teacher, known among parents for polished emails, perfect hair, and a tone that sounded kind only when it was addressed to donors. Mrs. Pierce looked Isaac up and down. "If the family has not completed payment arrangements, it would be better to settle that before conferences. I have a full schedule today, and I can't spend time on matters outside academics." Isaac held her gaze. "I'm here to discuss Zoe's progress." "Of course," she said, though her expression suggested that. "Dear, wait over there." She pointed not to the reception chairs where 2 parents in cashmere coats were being offered coffee, but to a bench near a supply closet. Isaac sat down. No one in that office knew he was the founder of the Freeman Education Foundation, a billionaire philanthropist whose name appeared on libraries, scholarship programs, science centers, and teacher fellowships across the country. No one knew that St. Anselm's board had spent months courting his foundation for the largest grant in the school's history, a $50 million gift meant to build a new equity and innovation center. And no one knew that Isaac had come that day not simply as Zoe's uncle. He had come to decide whether the school deserved a single dollar. Isaac Freeman had not grown up around schools like St. Anselm. He grew up on the south side of Chicago, in an apartment where the heat failed every winter and his mother boiled water on the stove to warm the kitchen. His father drove a city bus. His mother cleaned classrooms at night, including classrooms her own children would never have been allowed to enter. As a boy, Isaac used to help her on weekends. He remembered wiping chalk dust from desks with names carved into the wood. He remembered standing in private school hallways after dark, looking at maps, microscopes, trophies, and shelves of books, while wondering why some children were given entire worlds and others were told to be grateful for broken chairs. His mother never let him confuse poverty with shame. "Education is not charity," she told him. "It is justice arriving late." Isaac carried that sentence into adulthood. He studied finance, built a technology company that transformed school data systems, sold it for more money than his parents could have imagined, and spent the second half of his life funding educational access. He did not give money to schools because their buildings were beautiful. He gave money when he believed the adults inside those buildings understood children. St. Anselm had looked perfect on paper. Exceptional test scores, elegant campus, powerful alumni, a growing scholarship program, a principal, Dr. Lorraine Hargrove, who spoke beautifully in donor meetings about equal opportunity and moral leadership. The board wanted Isaac's grant to become the centerpiece of a national campaign. But Isaac had learned long ago that institutions dress themselves carefully when money is in the room. So he arrived in old clothes on an old bicycle, carrying no visible proof that he could change the school's future. For the first hour, he watched. He watched wealthy parents greeted by name, while other parents waited without explanation. He watched a father in work boots ask where to find the middle school wing and receive a vague hand gesture from a student volunteer who then personally escorted a mother wearing diamonds. He watched a financial aid parent lower her voice at the front desk while the receptionist spoke loudly enough for others to hear the words balance and late fee. Most painful of all, he watched the students watching the adults. Children learn hierarchy faster than adults admit. They notice who gets invited in warmly. They notice whose parents are offered coffee. They notice which last names make teachers stand straighter. By 8th grade, many of them had already learned to measure each other with the same cold instruments. When Zoe finally appeared near the office door, Isaac's face softened. She was small for her age, with neatly braided hair and a backpack covered in tiny, hand-drawn stars. The moment she saw him, she tried to smile. Then she noticed where he was sitting, noticed the glances from the receptionist and the other parents, and her smile weakened. Uncle Isaac," she whispered. He stood. "There's my scholar." She hugged him quickly, the way children hug in public when they are old enough to be embarrassed but young enough to still need it. 2 boys near the hallway laughed. One of them said, "Did your grandpa bike here?" The other whispered, "Maybe tuition went to the bicycle fund," Zoe heard. Isaac felt her shoulders tighten. He wanted to turn and speak. He wanted to tell those boys that the man they were mocking could buy every car in the parking lot without checking a bank account. But that would have taught the wrong lesson. It would have told them respect was owed only after wealth was proven. So Isaac placed a hand on Zoe's shoulder and said, "Let them spend their words how they choose. We'll spend ours better." Zoe nodded, though her eyes were wet. Mrs. Pierce called them into the conference room 5 minutes later. She did not apologize for the wait. She sat with a tablet in front of her and began speaking before Isaac had fully taken his chair. "Zoe is bright," she said, in the tone adults use when praise is about to become a door closing. "Very bright, actually, but St. Anselm is a demanding environment. Our families invest heavily in enrichment, travel, tutoring, leadership programs. Sometimes students from different financial backgrounds struggle to keep pace culturally, even when they can manage the academics." Isaac folded his hands. "What does culturally mean?" Mrs. Pierce paused. "Exposure, confidence, fit." "Fit," Isaac repeated. Zoe stared at her lap. Mrs. Pierce continued. "For example, the class trip to Washington is coming up. The deposit was due yesterday. If your family is unable to participate, I can mark Zoe as exempt. We try to be sensitive." Zoe looked up quickly. "I turned in my form." Mrs. Pierce gave her a thin smile. "Yes, Zoe, but not the full activity package. Some families choose the basic option." Isaac looked at Zoe. He had signed the full payment himself through the school portal. The money was not missing. The assumption was. He turned back to Mrs. Pierce. "Did you check the account? I'm sure finance will clarify." But before finance clarified, you assumed she could not afford it. Mrs. Pierce's expression tightened. "Mr. Freeman, I'm trying to be practical." Isaac had heard cruelty hide behind that word many times. He nodded slowly. Practicality without dignity becomes something else. Mrs. Pierce smiled as if he had said something quaint. Of course. When the conference ended, Zoe walked beside Isaac without speaking. At the lockers, two girls glanced at his coat and whispered. One asked Zoe if the school had started a Bring Your Charity Case to Conference Day. Zoe's face went still, in the way children go still when they are trying not to fall apart. Isaac knelt to tie a shoe that did not need tying, giving himself a moment to breathe. He had spent years funding schools. He had sat beside governors, trustees, and university presidents. He had listened to speeches about inclusion from people who could not recognize humiliation when it happened 3 feet away. That day, St. Anselm began teaching him the truth. Over the next week, Isaac returned several times. Sometimes he came as Zoe's uncle. Sometimes he stood quietly near pickup. Sometimes he sat in the visitor area with a notebook dressed the same way, letting people decide what he was worth. The school kept answering. At morning, drop-off staff waved expensive cars forward and made the older cars wait. At lunch, Isaac saw students comparing neighborhoods and summer plans like social currency. At the parent volunteer table, a mother told another, scholarship families are important for diversity, but they don't always understand the culture. At a board preview meeting, Dr. Hargrove described St. Anselm as a model of equity while standing beneath a donor wall arranged almost entirely by gift size. Then came the classroom incident. Isaac had arrived early to observe Zoe's history presentation. The school allowed guardians to stand near the back for project week, and he remained just outside the open classroom door. Zoe had spent 2 nights preparing a report on Ida B. Wells, practicing in front of Isaac until she could say every word clearly. Before Zoe's turn, Mrs. Pierce reminded the class about the Washington trip. Some students may not be able to participate in every activity, she said, glancing toward Zoe's desk. If a family is facing financial challenges, we should be understanding. The room shifted. A few students turned toward Zoe. Someone snickered. Zoe's hand tightened around her note cards. Mrs. Pierce seemed to realize too late that she had said too much. I only mean we should show compassion, a boy whispered. Basic package. The class laughed. Zoe lowered her head. Isaac stood outside the door, feeling the old anger of his childhood rise in him. Not the anger of embarrassment, the anger of recognition. He remembered being 12 years old and hearing a teacher announce that his family could not afford a field trip, as if poverty were a lesson plan. Before he could step in, another voice entered the room. Class, said Angela Brown. She stood in the doorway opposite Isaac, holding a stack of books against her chest. Angela taught literature and social studies in the middle school. She was younger than Mrs. Pierce, quieter, and not considered part of the school's inner circle because she spent more time with students than with donors. She looked at the laughing students, then at Zoe. Close your laptops, she said. The class obeyed, surprised by the firmness in her voice. Angela walked to the front. Let me make something clear. A student's worth is not measured by the car that drops them off, the vacation they describe, the package their family selects, or the amount of money attached to their name. The thing that makes a student worth respecting is the character they bring into this room every day. No one laughed now. Angela continued. If you use someone's family circumstances to make them feel small, you are not showing confidence. You are showing that you have confused privilege with achievement, and that is a serious misunderstanding. Zoe looked up. Mrs. Pierce's face flushed. Angela, I had this handled. Angela turned to her. Then handle it by protecting the student, not explaining her. The silence that followed was the first honest silence Isaac had heard in that building. After class, Angela found him near the hallway. You must be Zoe's uncle, she said. I'm Angela Brown. Isaac nodded. Thank you for what you said. I wish I had said it sooner. That is not a small thing to wish. Angela looked toward the classroom. Zoe is extraordinary. She reads ahead. She helps other students even when they exclude her. She pretends not to care, but she does. Isaac's voice softened. I know. Angela hesitated, then opened the tote bag she was carrying. Inside were 2 books Zoe had mentioned wanting both new. I was going to leave these in her locker as classroom extras, Angela said. I didn't want her to feel singled out. I thought maybe the family might be stretched with trip costs. Isaac studied her. You bought them yourself. Angela looked slightly embarrassed. Teachers do that more often than people think. Why? Because sometimes a book reaches a child before an adult does. Isaac felt something in his chest loosen. In a school full of polished language about values, Angela Brown was the first adult who had acted like values cost something. That evening, Isaac and Zoe sat at a small diner several blocks from campus. Zoe picked at her fries without eating. "Do I embarrass you?" she asked suddenly. Isaac looked at her as if the question had struck him. "No, I mean because I don't tell people who you are." He set down his coffee. "Zoe, listen to me. You never have to prove your value by borrowing mine." Her eyes filled. "They think I'm poor. Would that make you less worthy?" "No," she whispered. "Then let that answer grow stronger than their laughter." She wiped her cheek quickly. "It still hurts." "I know." Isaac reached across the table and covered her hand. "Being right does not make pain disappear. It only gives you somewhere to stand while it passes." Zoe nodded. He did not tell her yet what he planned to do. Children should not have to carry adult strategy on top of their own wounds. The Founders' Anniversary Gala took place 1 week after the parent conferences. St. Anselm had prepared for it like a coronation. The auditorium was filled with white flowers, gold programs, and banners celebrating 100 years of excellence. Parents filled the front rows. Trustees sat on stage. Students in formal uniforms lined the aisles. At the center of every conversation was the expected Freeman grant. Dr. Hargrove had not yet met Isaac Freeman in person. Few people had. His foundation was famous, but he preferred privacy and rarely attended public events. The school knew only that a representative had confirmed his attendance and that the $50 million decision would be announced that evening. Dr. Hargrove stepped to the podium, glowing with confidence. "At St. Anselm," she said, "we believe education is the great equalizer. We welcome children from every background into a community of respect, compassion, and opportunity." Isaac sat in the back row, wearing the same faded coat from parent night. No one had noticed him. Mrs. Pierce passed his row and frowned as if irritated that the poor-looking uncle had appeared at a donor gala. "This event is for invited families," she whispered. Isaac smiled. "Then I'm in the right place." She moved on, annoyed. After several speeches, the master of ceremonies returned to the microphone. "It is my great honor to welcome the founder of the Freeman Education Foundation, Mr. Isaac Freeman." The auditorium erupted in applause. People turned toward the side entrance, expecting a polished donor in a tailored suit. Instead, the man in the faded coat stood from the back row. The applause thinned, then broke apart. Isaac walked slowly down the aisle. Parents who had ignored him all week stared. Students leaned forward. Mrs. Pierce went pale. Dr. Hargrove's smile froze in place as recognition and horror arrived together. At the stage steps, Isaac removed his cap and handed his old coat to a foundation aide. Beneath it, he wore a dark suit, simple and perfectly fitted. He did not look transformed. He looked revealed. He stepped to the podium. "For 1 week," he said, "I visited this school as Zoe Freeman's uncle. Many of you saw me as a poor man, or an inconvenience, or someone who did not belong in these halls. I am grateful for that, because it allowed me to see St. Anselm clearly." No one moved. "I came prepared to give this institution $50 million. I came hoping to support scholarships, teacher development, and a center that would carry the word equity in its name. But equity is not a word for banners. It is a practice, and this week I watched this school fail that practice in ordinary moments." A screen behind him lit up. The video did not show children's faces clearly. Isaac would not punish students publicly for what adults had taught them privately. But the audio was clear enough. The receptionist directing him to finance before asking why he had come. Mrs. Pierce suggesting tuition problems without checking. Parents discussing scholarship families as culture problems. Students laughing after Zoe was singled out. Dr. Hargrove praising equality in one meeting, while staff discussed donor seating by wealth tier in another. Then the screen showed Angela Brown. Angela standing before the class. Angela saying that a student's worth was not measured by the car that dropped them off. Angela leaving books in Zoe's locker with a note that read, "For a mind that keeps reaching." Angela speaking privately to an administrator about the bullying and being told not to make class tension into a social issue. By the time the screen went dark, the auditorium felt smaller. Isaac turned to Dr. Hargrove. "A school can build beautiful buildings with money," he said. "It can buy technology banners, laboratories, and brochures full of smiling children. But it cannot teach character while its adults practice contempt." Dr. Hargrove stood unsteadily. "Mr. Freeman, I am deeply sorry for any misunderstanding. We would welcome the opportunity to review these incidents internally." "You will review them," Isaac said, "but not with my money." A sound moved through the room, half gasp, half collapse. Isaac continued. "The Freeman Education Foundation is withdrawing the $50 million grant from St. Anselm Preparatory Academy. Effective tonight, our foundation will redirect the funds to a partnership serving Chicago public schools that have already demonstrated what this institution only advertised: respect for every child." Trustees began whispering urgently. Parents stared at the stage. Mrs. Pierce sat motionless, her hands clenched in her lap. Isaac looked toward Angela, who sat near the side aisle, with tears in her eyes. "Miss Angela Brown, I did not come here looking for a perfect school. I came looking for people worthy of trust. You protected a child when silence would have been easier. You gave privately when public praise was not available. You understood that education begins before the textbook opens." Angela shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. Isaac smiled gently. "If you are willing, I would like you to serve as director of the Freeman Foundation's Student Dignity Initiative. Your first program will be launched at Carter Hill Public School, where I understand you have already accepted a teaching position for next semester." The room turned toward Angela. She had not announced her resignation widely. She had planned to leave quietly, tired of fighting a culture that treated compassion as disruption. Angela stood, trembling. "Mr. Freeman, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, only if you believe the work matters more than the title." She wiped her face. "Then yes." For the first time that evening, the applause that rose was not polite. It came from the back rows first, where support staff and a few scholarship families sat, then from students, then from parents who had remained silent too long. It did not erase the damage, but it made one thing clear: the story was no longer controlled by the people at the podium. The next morning, St. Anselm's board announced that Dr. Hargrove had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Mrs. Pierce was removed from classroom duties. The finance office's family communication policies were suspended and rewritten. An outside review began not only of bullying complaints, but of how donor culture had shaped discipline access and classroom assumptions. Some parents were angry at Isaac. They said he had embarrassed the school. They said he could have handled it privately. Isaac did not respond publicly, but to Zoe he said, "People often called truth embarrassing when they wanted harm to remain quiet." Zoe transferred at the end of the term, not because she had been defeated, but because healing sometimes requires leaving the room where people learn to wound you. Her new school was smaller, louder, less polished, and more alive. Carter Hill Public School did not have marble floors or a donor wall arranged by gift size. It had crowded classrooms, old lockers, teachers buying supplies with their own money, and a principal who knew every student's name because she stood at the door each morning and greeted them herself. When Angela arrived there, she did not arrive as a savior. She arrived as a teacher among teachers who had been doing hard work long before cameras or grants appeared. The Freeman Foundation funded libraries, counseling support, field trips, teacher fellowships, and after-school programs. But Angela made sure the first announcement was not about Isaac's money. It was about the students. Zoe smiled again there, not all at once. Hurt does not leave because adults finally do the right thing, but slowly she began raising her hand without checking who might laugh. She joined the debate team. She gave a speech about Ida B. Wells that made her English teacher cry. And on the day the new library opened, she found a quiet corner and pulled a book from the shelf and placed Angela's old note inside the cover. For a mind that keeps reaching, Isaac watched her from the doorway and thought of his mother cleaning classrooms after dark. He thought of all the children who had been asked to shrink so other people could feel superior. He thought of the $50 million people had treated as a prize when it had always been a responsibility. Education, he understood, did not begin with buildings. It began with the way an adult looked at a child. A teacher could make a student feel poor with one careless sentence. A principal could teach arrogance by rewarding it. A parent could pass prejudice to a child without ever calling it a lesson. But the opposite was true as well. One teacher could defend a student's dignity. One adult could refuse to laugh. One school could choose fairness before prestige. That was why Isaac did not regret withdrawing the grant. He had not taken money away from children. He had taken it away from an institution that had forgotten them. Then he placed it where children were still seen. Years later, when Zoe was accepted into college with a full scholarship, a reporter asked her what had changed her life most: her uncle's foundation, the new school, or the public scandal that exposed St. Anselm. Zoe thought for a moment and said, "Miss Brown." The reporter seemed surprised. "Because she gave you books?" Zoe shook her head. "Because before she gave me books, she gave me back my name. She reminded everyone I was a student, not a financial category." That answer reached Isaac before the article was published. He read it twice, then sat very still. For all his money, all his grants, all his buildings, that was the sentence that mattered. A child is not a financial category. A parent is not a tuition account. A person's worth is not parked in the lot outside. So, if this story stays with you, let it be in the next ordinary moment, when judgment arrives quickly, when a parent walks into a school wearing work clothes, when a child cannot afford the same trip as everyone else, when a family asks a question slowly because they are nervous, when someone looks out of place in a room designed for wealth. That is when education truly begins. Not in the brochure, not in the gala speech, not on the donor wall. It begins in the answer adults give when no one powerful seems to be listening. If you believe every child deserves fairness, dignity, and respect, regardless of their family's income, leave a comment and share this story. It may remind someone that one careless sentence from an adult can wound a child for years, but one act of courage can help that same child stand tall again.